So, welcome everyone. Yes, I see we're all coming in. That's good to see. So, welcome everyone. Let's give people a bit of time to come in. We're going to be doing things from YouTube this time, and maybe also you're joining in from Twitter. And yeah, we're going to be showing quite a few things today and talk about quite a few things.
Yeah, great to have everybody here. This is part of our series of events tied in with the announcement of the Figment HQ design competition that Arkio, Figment, and Spatial are teaming up to bring to you. So super excited to have everybody here. If you don't mind, we'd love to see where you guys are joining from. Can you drop that in the chat? And we'll keep this somewhat casual. We do have some things we're going to walk through, but we definitely want to leave space and time for questions. So please, feel free to kind of drop those into the chat as well. And we may hold some of those to the end, but if they seem like they are pertinent to what we are talking about at the time, we may kind of go ahead and try to answer some of those as we go. We'll just kind of play it by ear. Fantastic. We've got some people from Cincinnati, Colombia, Germany, really all over the world, Netherlands, Canada, South Africa.
Oh, nice.
Nice. I myself am in a new location. I'm actually joining today from Florence. So if we have a bit of a rocky connection, I may bounce. I will come back. Hopefully everything will be fine. Things seem to be fairly stable, but yeah, I'm joining from Florence today.
That's good. Great to finally have you on this side of the pond, Richard.
Yes.
So I will be joining from the Netherlands. So that's good to see. There's also some folks from Netherlands here. We'll be also traveling a bit in the next few weeks because there's coming to be some events. So maybe from the people from the US, I might see you in the next few weeks because we'll be there as well. But today we're going to be talking about like the workflows that we discussed also in the spatial event. And I'm just going to bring up the slides over here. Maybe you wanted to do that introduction a bit, Richard?
Sure, I'll walk through this just a little bit, right? So a couple of weeks ago, we announced the design competition for Figment HQ to be built out for spatial. Built inside of Archaeo. Really a fantastic design opportunity for everybody. These were some of the slides that we kind of walked through in terms of some of the capabilities of what you can do with Archaeo with some of the built-in components, the Unity plugin. Obviously, we demoed a bit of Arkio HQ. We hosted an event inside of Arkio HQ, inside of Spatial. I hope a lot of you guys were able to join. If not, the space is still open and live, so feel free to join in. There's some fantastic art exhibits. This one by Jay Kyren. Beautiful photographs of Iceland. All of that is on display inside of Arkio HQ, which is what you see here, live inside of spatial.io. There's the art exhibit by Kyren. We have Pieter Geer Magnuson. He did some wonderful sculptures for Arkio HQ. We've got some user showcase models. But we made the big announcement about the design competition, Figment, Arkio, and Spatial. What you probably know is the design competition is currently running through middle of August. What you don't know, which I think we can announce, can we not? We can announce it, are the prizes today. So this is the first time this is being announced. And let me pull that up so I can actually get this right. So first prize is 15,000 US dollar coin in crypto plus an Oculus Quest 2 headset. really fantastic prize for first place. There's a second place prize of 5,000 US dollar coin plus an Oculus headset. There are runner-up prizes, which will include 5 Oculus Quest headsets. There's a plaque with design credits, and obviously opportunities for blog posts and sharing on socials and all sorts of things. So first time I think we've been able to make that announcement. I think that is coinciding with announcements that Figment is making as well. So super grateful to be working with Figment on this design competition.
Yeah, so it's a great opportunity for professionals, but also hobbyists to work together and come up with an HQ with the help of Arkio and Spatial. Today we're going to be showing a bit some of these workflows to get to the next level with your Arkio design skills. And we'll be doing this mostly live from like Richard Allen's headset and my headset. So we'll be just jumping right in. And yeah, we could take you with us and explain a bit of like how the HQ from Arkio was made and how you could use some of those techniques to also make your own designs and work with people on a design with Arkio. So I'm going to be, let's see if this all works as expected. Yeah, I'm going to be sharing my screen in here. Should all be seeing my screen right now. And Richard Allen should join the space soon.
Yep, coming in right now.
So let's move a bit out of the way so we can see you come in.
Yeah, do you see me?
Yes, there you are.
Wonderful.
So here we are in the HQ. What are we looking at there, Richard?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is, obviously this is HQ model. When you launch Archaeo on your main home panel, I'll open that up right here. Well, maybe.
Yeah, you can open it up indeed with the main. Let me just show the users then.
Yeah, right there. So you can open up your main panel and you can jump right into Arkio HQ. Obviously, this space has been, what you're seeing is some of the work in progress for Arkio HQ. I've taken apart some of the geometry so I can show you how some of this was built, some of the methodologies of working with Arkio's unique, intuitive, kind of parametric design capabilities. So there's some specific ways you want to kind of work with that. And I think we're going to get into that in just a minute. I think, Johan, did you want to kick us off with some of the kind of the basic building blocks?
Yes, let's do that. So I'm going to be jumping in VR, and I will try to keep my head still to make it a bit comfortable to watch. But just explaining a bit, going beyond the basics in Arkio, when you're making geometry in the app, you're working with flexible parametric components, and kind of the building system that's in place here. It's good to understand that a bit better so you can make it best use of it. So when I'm making solids and subtracting in it, it's all the same. In Arkio, you make either solids or voids by pressing shapes inside of the shapes, and all of the objects that you make are they behave almost like a physical model. So the best way to work with Arkio is actually using your hands and just picking up the geometry, and you see how it's kind of sliding together and moving and aligning to nearby shapes by just moving them nearby other objects. Now these are just basics, but it's good to understand what is happening when objects are glued together like this. So this shape, let me just put like a little tree on the top here and here. This shape got all connected in the edges. So when I'm making a volume on another volume, you kind of see how it snaps together in the edges. It means that these faces, when I'm now using the edit tool or my hands, you see how they kind of snapped together and they move together. So this is the building system of Arkio. And if you want to move several objects at the same time, this will actually help in your benefit. Sometimes you don't want things to move like this. You can actually twist your hand while you're doing an operation. You can see how the highlight of my controller changes to only move one of the faces. Controller straight, it moves all of the objects on the top, all of the same objects. You can move the controller with the wrist down to move only one face. And if you do the wristband up like this, let me just do it with the other hand, so you can see it a bit better. When I move my controller up like this, I can also make only the top surfaces move like this. So you can use this system with your hands to move objects. A much easier way to move things without moving everything at once is you simply disconnect the shapes. So now everything would move if I stretch this shape. If I don't want all of my other geometry to move, I just pick it up, disconnect the object, move the object into whatever direction I want to have it, and then just put it back to the original shapes. And you notice when I'm doing that, it's still snapping those faces together again. So you can just snap everything in place to make it like a parametric editable object. So that's good basics to know, but this will be the modeling system that can help you in your benefit, because the system is much closer to like a physical modeler, but it also has some smart parametrics going on inside. Like a couple of other things, all these dimensions that show up, you can just, when you made an edit, the dimensions stay in. You can click on the dimension and you can update the dimension by giving an input. And this input can be in metric or in feet, and you can change that in settings. There's also some other things I want to quickly show. Like when you're making and editing geometry, basically every operation you're doing in the app, you can also always watch your wristband, because this gives you extra options. So I could work with orthogonal stretching, which means that if I grab this point over here, it's going to stretch the cube orthogonally. If I switch it to the free DOM mode, I can also stretch the shape per feature in a free form, I think. And similar different modes are there when I'm switching to like a split mode, for example, when I'm making cubes. It's splitting the shapes into building floors. And if I cut into those building floors, I can actually work with like a tower shapes that have fixed building height. Now the last quick thing I want to show, but I quickly want to check out the timing to see if we're not over, is I can make, can you mute yourself right now, please? When I'm making shapes and I'm giving them a slight distortion, for example, I make this shape slightly smaller on one side. This can actually be used as a building volume that could be stacked. So if you can think of this as a block, like if you would make a copy of this block, I'm just trying to get it. So if we have this block and you try to make a copy of this block, I'm going to duplicate this in. You can make the copy, it will kind of snap in place accordingly, and baking several of these blocks on top of each other, it will make an basically an arc. So these can be seen as building blocks or cubes from your scene. So let me just try to do that as well. I basically make I can make arrays of the shapes on top of each other to make a segmented building arch. And this can be used to make more complex shapes with Arkio. So if you want to make more curvy shapes and adjust objects accordingly, you can see how this would give you some extra flexibility when making shapes. Let's see. Richard Allen seems to be dropping out of the meeting. Are you still there?
Yeah, so I've run into an issue, Johan.
Yes.
The issue I've run into, and maybe this is okay for everybody to know, is so my headset re-updated to the new software version. So I'm not seeing you model inside my headset. So I'm trying to re-downgrade to the same version. And so I say that that's probably okay for people to know that sometimes if you're trying to work collaboratively, you need to be working on the same version of Archaeo.
Yes, that's good. Like we gave you access to some developers build, so that's it was unintentionally updating for you. But this is indeed what happened now. So your version got out of sync. What we could do is, if you manage to get it still working, like you could still show us around in the scene, and I can do the operation for you, so people can still see what is going on.
Okay, let me come back into the room real quick, and I was trying to come in another way. We had this working just a couple minutes ago, and then in the meantime, while I set the headset down, it updated itself.
Oh yes, nice, love it.
Okay, give me just a moment. I'm coming back in the room.
So in the meantime, I can actually still show some of the other things. So when I'm touching geometry or moving objects, it's switching between my active tool in Archaeo to the new operation. So now I'm touching the geometry. I'm going to make. Can you mute yourself, Richard? It's moving the that object, that selection of objects, and all of the objects that are glued to it. So I don't need to think about the tool. I just reach what I want to move, and everything attached will move with it. And if I don't want certain things to move, you just briefly disassemble them, and then you can move the objects accordingly.
Okay. Yes, I think that's fantastic. And I think what I was going to try to walk through, and we'll see how much I can do. So you can see me. Yeah, I'm watching myself on screen. We'll see how much I can interact, and you can see me interacting with things. I really wanted to talk about, I guess, five points that I learned in building Archaeo HQ that I thought would be really advantageous for all of you in getting in and building with Archaeo. So the first one is pretty basic, but it is so very important. Especially when you get in and you start building with really complicated geometry inside of Archaeo. And that's this idea of creating duplicates. So what you see over here on this table is a lot of how I built Archaeo HQ. As I would build different components, I would create a duplicate and then start working on that. So in doing that, you are oftentimes going to break geometry. I have broken a lot of geometry inside of Arkio when I was building Arkio HQ. Some of it is just the nature of trying to kind of figure out how to build something. And you want to be able to go back. Sometimes undo doesn't get you where you want to go. And sometimes undoing, you'll end up losing work that you don't want to lose. So I find it extremely valuable to create a series of breadcrumbs for yourself. And that's what I've done. As I build Arkio HQ, I built it with a series of breadcrumbs that I could always go back to a previous state and work from that, or bring that back into my workflow and continue going. So it sounds basic, but it is extremely important. It will save you a lot of headache. The second idea is order of operations. And let's see, it's not going to let me move this. So that's one of the things that I don't have
I can do it for you.
Okay, so
yes.
Order of operations. Johan talked a bit about how the geometry is hosted and how you can move things. As you start to build really complicated geometry, I think it's really important to think through how you are hosting things in a very intentional way, because you want to be able to move things out of the way and basically treat an object as a full object, right? So here you see kind of a bit of the pieces that goes into making the gallery building inside of Archaeo HQ. Johan, if you will grab this spot right here, this landing, all of the HQ gallery building is hosted on this single landing, because this was the point in which I could locate it on the site model. So it's very easy for me to kind of pick this up and bring it back and leave the whole model kind of connected together. And there's a series of hosted geometries, right? So within that point right there hosts the entire model, but there are a series of smaller pieces hosted on top of that. And each of them have a control point that I intentionally kind of placed. And some of it's trial and error. You kind of build something and then you go back and realize, okay, this is the way I need to connect them. This is my order of operations so that I can disassemble and reassemble things. So that is my number 2 tip. Really, really important for building complicated geometry inside of Archaeo. The third is, and this goes back to, Johan talked about building with your hands. You know, you're building inside of Archaeo like you would build a model by hand. And for those of us that went to architecture school or have built things in a wood shop or anything like that, you get used to building jigs. You build yourself tools that will help you control the geometry. And so that is my third tip, is make a jig. Like when you figure out the geometry that you want and you figure out that is going to be, you want to be precise. You know, I am an architect. I like things to be really precise. I like to be really specific with the way I build and the way things come together. So over here, kind of in this yellow area, you see a couple of the types of jigs that I built. Archaeo, so these jigs were specific to the gallery building, and I've built a number of jigs throughout the process, but these jigs here are specific to the gallery building. This one that kind of looks like a sandwich, this was a jig specifically for being able to make sure that all of my walls, everything was at the same height. That was, I think, 10 feet, maybe 12 feet in height. It corresponds with this slab building right here. So everything that was within that zone, I wanted to be exactly the same height. So I would use this jig and I would smash my architecture, like I'd build a wall and I'd slide it up there and I'd smash it into that. Yeah, just like Johan is doing right there. And that's how I was able to kind of reproduce the geometry over and over and over again. Again, think about it the way a lot of this was kind of going back to the way I would build a physical model in architecture school. I would build myself the tools that would make that work really easy and reproducible. So that's kind of number 2 or number 3, right? Like, so that's making a jig. Another type of jig that I would make is, you see right here, I've got these angled walls. So I really wanted the skylight oculuses to have this kind of interesting shape that was kind of looking up towards the sky. It was really kind of inspired by a couple ideas, right? One, it was kind of inspired by the volcanoes of Iceland, hence kind of the dark color and kind of the general shape. But it was also about creating skylight moments that were looking up towards the amazing kind of aurora over the skies of Iceland. So I really wanted that to open up the galleries up to the night sky. So that was kind of part of the inspiration. How would you build that? And how would you make it really reproducible? So what you can kind of see right here is I started with a hollow box, and that's really getting into number 5, but that's okay. I created a hollow box, and let me see if Johan is doing that.
Yes.
And then with that hollow box, and I can walk you through this, Johan.
Yes, let's go.
Walk you through how I do this.
Yes.
So if you build yourself a hollow box, maybe just on one of the yellow platforms, right? So you've just got yourself an empty hollow box that has 5 sides to it. And I would build it maybe on one of the flat ones. So if you pull back just a little bit maybe on top of that jig, maybe just build you a hollow box right there. Okay.
Yeah. There we go.
If you'll take that hollow box and move it inside that jig, so it's just kind of sitting inside. And now what I want you to do is edit the walls. And so edit one wall and smash it up into the roof. Yeah.
So, like this, and then
Just
for the
like that.
other, there we go.
Yep. And the one thing you do have to notice, what is really important with doing this, is that the shape that you're smashing into has to be bigger than the shape you are smashing. So so that's where you're running into just a little bit of problem. Like, so you almost have to be kind of smaller. But that shape you can now kind of smash into those walls and get that kind of open, hollow volume that has some interesting angles to it.
Yeah. So basically what we're seeing here, this would give me the shape inside, just using that little rig that was made. We have that very specific shape, and you can see from the inside is actually a hollow shape. So this is how you made most of that, like those elements, right? Like you kind of forced the geometry to be following the exact planes that you already set. And you just kept using those references to make the actual elements.
Yes. So and so basically, once you've made that basic hollow shape, the next thing that I did, and I think this is really a useful tool for everybody to think about as well, is thinking about the orientation, right? Because Archaeo has a really fantastic tool that is the kind of the slice tool, but the slice tool only works horizontally. So sometimes you want to be able to slice a piece of geometry in a way that is not horizontal. So you need to turn your model around, right? So if you look at you might want to then slice it at an angle. And that's exactly what I did when I cut up those kind of skylights, is I would slice them at an angle. I built myself a new jig that would allow me to rotate the model at a precise angle. And then at that angle, I could slice that geometry. And then you kind of build yourself a number of jigs so you can kind of then bring it back and put it in the original orientation. So it's something you kind of have to think through. You have to kind of think through a couple steps ahead when doing some of these processes. You need to be able to rotate the model, slice it, and then rotate it back to where you want. But what you find when you do this is that the geometry is precisely built and lined up. So you can then take, for instance, right? This piece right here, I don't know if you kind of see me. I've taken this top piece, this was sliced off the whole. This lower portion, I rotated it 90 degrees, sliced off the edge, because that's the portion that actually engages with the art gallery. The rest of it is kind of an oculus. I'd sliced off the very top, so that way I got rid of the top box, the lid for the hollow box, and then I sliced myself a tiny little sliver off of that, and that's what becomes the red ring. So it is a series, it's one piece of geometry that I've sliced a number of ways and reassembled. And then when you put it all together, it all lines up precisely. And I think for me, this was one of those tools that became really, really advantageous because the hollow box, so that's tip number 5. I use the hollow box a lot. I find if you can build it with the hollow box, your construction is going to be better in the end. You're not going to have a lot of times when you're building some of this and the way it hosts geometry and it creates and you carve away, you end up not being able to place something in a spot that's been carved. So if you build it with a hollow box, it's a whole lot easier. And I want to kind of point out where I've built hollow boxes, right? So all of the skylights started as hollow boxes. This volume right here, which was the main kind of rectilinear box for the gallery, that is a hollow box. It's a hollow box that I sliced off. Actually, I built the hollow box vertically, and then I rotated it 90 degrees, and then sliced it at an angle. And then you come in and you start carving out of that. So fairly simple, basic hollow box. If you follow me over to this front table, a lot of the geometry for the learning center were hollow boxes. The top, obviously, the skylights, again, were hollow boxes. All of these elements that protruded out and created office spaces and meeting room spaces and those sorts of things, those were also hollow boxes. And those were hollow boxes that I had created a jig so I can make sure they were all the same height, again, 12 feet. So they all lined up exactly perfectly. And then just by creatively slicing off elements. So this box right here, I had sliced off two sides. This one has multiple sides sliced off. So it looks like at the end of the day, this looks like this is just 3 walls or 3 planes. It is actually just a hollow box that I have cut off multiple planes. And it's more stable. It's less geometry than if it were 3 separate planes. So I think those are, let me go back over here and look. I think those are the biggest tips that I wanted to share with you that I learned through the process that made my workflow a whole lot easier. And I appreciate Johan for kind of building along as I kind of walk through it. Hopefully it's made some sense. Are there any questions?
Like you're currently maybe seeing some of the questions, Richard, and if you have the headset off, like I'm still sharing the screen. But like I think it's very good to show that like what you were talking about with these boxes, and these boxes, they use Archaeo's parametric nature very good. Like you can see how the geometry still stays flexible, even though the walls still stay the same thickness. So you could really use this to make also more sculptural slabs like this, still with a fixed wall thickness.
So 4 and 5, let me go back, let me look. Tip 4 was being creative with the orientation. So that is again about thinking that sometimes what you want to build, you need to build it upside down, or you need to build it 90 degrees from top so that you can use like the slicing tool. So just because the slicing tool only cuts horizontally doesn't mean that it can't end up cutting something at a funky angle. You just have to build yourself a jig to do it, right? Like think about using a table saw, right? Like the blade only usually cuts one way, but if you build yourself a jig, you can cut that geometry any way you want. So that was number 4 is be creative with your orientation. Know that sometimes to get what you want, you have to think about it a different way. And then number 5 was the using hollow boxes. That as much as you can, if you can think through how to use a hollow box, that would be my biggest recommendation, because it simplifies the geometry and it allows you to nest other pieces into it a whole lot easier than if you go in and you start carving it away, right?
Mm-hmm. Like some other tips I can give, maybe you look if there's questions about the steps, is if you have an Arkio solid geometry, and like sometimes, like for example, when I'm working with these other primitive shapes, if I'm starting to kind of make a shape on another shape and I'm dragging it in, it's not orienting in the way I want. I kind of want to cut a triangle in this triangle, but it's orienting in the wrong way. Also here, it's like adding to that tip of orientation. The rotation of the shape can still be adjusted. So you can just pick up that object and then use the edit tool and maybe some rigs to make it more precise, to force that solid shape into a hollow shape. So you could use any starting shape you have, just make it a solid and just kind of convert it to a void by just pressing it inside of another solid shape. So here again we see like the advantage of the hollow shape. Like the hollow shape stays parametrically with the same wall thickness. So I can kind of jump inside of this space over here and really see like what that space will already look like. So you can imagine, like with some simple primitives, you can already build some pretty interesting, architecturally interesting spaces. In the meantime, I can maybe check some of the questions as well, or do you see some questions, Richard Allen, that we...
There's one question about a recent update in camera shivering. Is that something you're aware of?
So we have, we are using application space warp with Arkio, and I don't know if you guys are a bit familiar with some of these techniques, but we're basically rendering at half the frame rates. So typical VR apps, they run at like 70 or 90 frames per second. We run at half the frame rate. So we have more computational power to load bigger models and to like have more space for our rendering engine. And you might see sometimes a bit of jittering on some of the like things like your avatar. If your avatar goes out of sight, sometimes you see a bit of like jittering, and also there's some artifacts with the UI. We are aware of these issues, and we're trying to fix them in the next updates. But if you see very specific issues with like jittering or uncomfortable experiences, please let us know, because it might be an issue related to this application space what we're using, and we could look into finding a solution with you.
David, thank you for your comment that our glitch here kind of happening mid demo. We had it all worked out, but you're right. It does show that we were able to collaborate, and I just have to give it to Johan, able to like one hand hold his headset, other hand manage the VR. The guy is a wizard.
I got more familiar with this because this is a very comfortable way of looking at it. Like I'm way too fast when moving around with my head, but this is a lot less hard, less hard to make it uncomfortable. So I think this helps everyone to do it like this.
Okay, Diana, you asked a question about just published in Spatial. We did a webinar. I don't know if you had a chance to join us for that. I think it was about 2 weeks ago at this point, live from inside Spatial, where we talked about that process. So you can export directly from Arkio to a GLB file, and that file will import directly into Spatial. So super seamless if you want to go that route. The model for Archaeo HQ is a little bit more complicated. I wanted to take that and do a bit of a light bake and add some textures. So I actually took that out of Archaeo and brought that into Blender. Did a little bit of cleanup of removing some extra geometry inside of Rhino. But that then, yes, was exported directly into Spatial.
And there are some, I think we have a recording of that. Like we can share it again on our Discord if it's available, of some of those tips and processes. We have a basic introduction, or like the basic steps that are needed to get things from Arkio to Spatial on the Arkio website in our support page. That's where you can find the steps to take something to Spatial with like minimum effort. We are also going to document a bit more some of the like additional edits you can do to make your scene looking a bit better in Spatial with some light baking. So that will be coming in the next few weeks, where we'll add some more info. Also, the guys from Spatial have like really interesting like help pages on this, some video tutorials. So I definitely recommend to also check Spatial's website if you want to get into light baking and like more of the scene preparations outside of Arkio. And maybe good to mention, like the also for the design competition, like we of course recommend people to build things in Arkio, but you're not only limited to that. You can use other applications, like we for example have Rhino integration plugin where you can just export your models to Arkio. We have one for Revit, for Unity, for SketchUp. You can use this to bring models to Arkio, and then from Arkio it's pretty easy to place those models. You just like if you're on a Windows device like I'm using here, it's just a matter of running those plugins and then finding in your import placement folder the file that you want to place. In this case I have this like Rhino file over here, And you can either place it at the origin, which will keep the origin of the original 3D file, or place it as an object. And then you can just place that object anywhere in the scene. And this will behave a bit like an Arkio, like other Arkio objects, like this tree, for example. But the advantage of bringing in geometry like this is that you can actually model on top of that geometry. You can place objects. Well, it's on the facade, but you can place objects on top of the geometry. You can teleport inside of that geometry. Let's see if I can. It's like a tricky to get it. Yeah, we are almost there. Almost. I'm going to use math. Sorry. So you can teleport on top of this geometry, and you can also kind of do the same operation inside. So you can do the like a decoration or like add Archaeo shapes and surfaces to the geometry. And all of the
I've lost your audio, Johan. Is it just me? Could someone put a comment if that's just me or if everybody's lost Johan's audio?
You lost my audio? You can still hear me now, or are you still good? I should quickly check. Is it good again now? Or not? You're not hearing me? Okay, let me quickly try one thing. Let me see if I think we're still live. It seems like, people still hear me. That's good.
Okay. I think it was me, and it was my
Yeah,
my internet in Florence. So
I'm going to be sharing my screen again because it's more fun to see Arkio, right?
yes, it is.
So, like when we have geometry that got imported into Arkio, let me just do that step again then. So you can just place it as an object. You place geometry. Oh, that's two models. You just only need one. You can create geometry on top of that object, and you can place objects on it. And when you pick up the original 3D shape, everything still gets glued on top of it together. So you could include any other shape, 3D model in your Arkio creation process, jump and on top of it, work on top of it, add things on top of it, and still work with the same principles that you got familiar with already when you're using Arkio geometry.
Okay, Diana, you're asking a couple questions about the competition and the submission for the HQ. There will be probably I know there's a blog post that should be coming out within the next couple days, next week at the latest, that will really detail out the submission process. It will again kind of reiterate the prizes that we announced here earlier. I'll highlight a couple things. Mid-July, we are hosting this is really to encourage everybody to get in and get started. We're hosting a opportunity for you to pitch your kind of pre-design ideas, so that that the jury and Figment can potentially respond to what you're working on. So I think that's a really great opportunity and a really good reason for people to get started early. Give you a chance to potentially get some feedback before your final submission is put together. So that will be mid-July. The other thing that I would really encourage everybody to do is to join the Archaeo's Discord channel. That's where we will be publishing a lot more information about the competition as we go forward, in concert with both Figment and Spatial.
It's a very good one indeed. It's like there's still some details that we're ironing out. There will be more details following, but this deadline is still pretty far off from now. So this gives a good time also to get familiar with Arkio, with like inviting some of your friends to also try out Arkio, to load in creations from other 3D apps, because you don't have to start from scratch everything in Arkio. You can load things in there and work on top of these models to get yourself a bit familiar with working with virtual physical models. And there is a lot to learn. The tool itself is like, we have a pretty simple user interface, but there's a lot of underlying usability in some of the behaviors that we also showed today. So the geometry, how it parametrically connects, how it can be edited using like small rigs, how you can use the tools in your advantage, like Richard Allen described. So we definitely recommend just spending a bit more time within the app, and also giving us feedback if there's anything that is still that you feel is not working well, or that like if you see, for example, the jittering that someone described, please let us know, and then we'll try to solve those issues. Did you spot any other questions?
Yeah, there's
should I?
more questions in here, and
Yeah.
forgive me, I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this correctly. Not even sure how I would pronounce it. That's how I would probably pronounce it. Maybe so. I apologize if I've mispronounced that. You're asking about size of model and how big that model can be coming into spatial. A lot of that is documented both on Archaeo's website. Johan and I contributed just a little bit, but Johan put together a great blog article kind of walking through some of that details. And I think it's 250 meters by 250 meters is what we determined was the size inside of Arkio that you could build the table to bring into spatial. Mimmer, you'd asked about the polygon count, and yes, that is going to be an issue. That is going to be an issue inside of VR right now with today's current technology, right? So be smart about how you can build to minimize the number of polygons. This model has quite a few polygons. I was able to bring this in its entirety with everything that's in here into spatial. The final model that you experience inside of spatial has textures and those things added to it. I have cleaned out some of the polygons, stuff that you'll never see. So like the backsides of the mountains and those kinds of things, I deleted those extra polygons just to make it a little bit more lightweight. But most of what you see right here comes into spatial just fine. But you are going to run into a limit. You're going to run into a limit on file size. I think they say 50 megabytes. I think I find a little bit less than that tends to work a little bit better in terms of overall like just megabyte size. But yes, you run into an issue with size in terms of meters, in terms of what it can generate as space around, as well as you run into number of polygons. So there's really three different things that you have to kind of balance when you're bringing in those models into spatial.
And I'd like to add to this, if you keep your geometry mostly in Arkio, it's actually not going to run out of hand that fast, because the geometry is plane based. So the polygon numbers will be relatively low. Even if you would have some double faces, like in the back of this face, like there would be a face in the middle, like the polygon count would still be low. But what you have to be really cautious about is adding like a lot of like props. For example, like you added like thousands of trees, those will add up. And also the things you bring into Arkio, because that's in your own control, how much or how heavy these models are that you bring in. So this model that I brought in, I think it's 40,000 polygons already. And I believe this scene itself already was for like around that size. So you can imagine if you bring in a model from, I don't know, SketchUp or something, and you download it, you have to be really picky if you need to put an asset in and make that asset really as simple as you can. If you use our plugins for and the like the plugins that we have for Rhino, for example, and Revit, we optimize the geometry. You can reduce the polygons, so you can get like the geometry itself will be a bit more uh, jotted. You can kind of see the triangles a bit better, but it will at least reduce the geometry to keep it a bit more in VR's limits. For spatial, I don't know the exact limits, but they also have a limitation to the amount of textures you can put in.
Mhm.
So that's something you also want to keep an eye on. Like when you're making something for spatial, just try to not give everything a different color, give everything a different texture. Try to keep it nice and balanced. Like you see what Richard Allen actually did here is nice. He played with the color scheme. He kept it consistent, and it looks really nice and all fitting together. And also is good for the performance.
Johan, thank you for correcting my pronunciation. So we've got two Johans. We've got Johan on.
Yes. Studios, nice.
Two Johans today. So that's great. Thanks for correcting me. I apologize for mispronouncing that. Johan, do you want to speak a little bit about, we've got a couple questions about the integrations, and you just talked about bringing in Revit models. So do you want to talk just a little bit about the 360 integration, and are there things on the roadmap that about future integrations that's we've got a couple questions about that as well.
Okay. So on future like integrations, we are unfortunately I cannot share too many details there, but we are looking at other things. There's like what we are trying to achieve first is getting the basic workflow to be like good, and we currently believe it's still a bit of a struggle to get models into Arkio. So we first want to get that process a bit nicer. And what we did with Unity kind of shows a bit what we're also thinking of with the other integrations that we have with Revit, Rhino, and SketchUp. So we want to make that a bit more cloud-based and a bit easier. So that's something you can expect like in the coming months. So making it easier to bring models to your Quest headset, to Arkio, without, for example, having to have a meeting. And we're going to be streamlining that process a bit. Integrations with the tools themselves will keep making them better. Like we have in Unity, we have the full bidirectional integration. So you can load your Unity scene, you can move individual game objects, and those will update back to their new position and new size when you bring it back to Unity. And we want to do something like that also with our other plugins. And we have a lot of users using the Revit plugin. I think that's one of the most popular plugins right now. But we also got some requests for like Archicad, Vectorworks, some other 3D design tools. We're aware. we look at all of them, but we also following like what the most user requests we get. So, but if you have specific IDs requirements that would also benefit like the majority of the users, we would be very happy to hear you out, and yeah, looking if we can fit that into our roadmap in the coming months.
Well, speaking of roadmap, there's also a question about potential for an API for Archaeo plugin developments by others.
Yes, that's a good question. We haven't like started on something like that yet, but we have heard the question from some other developers as well. We definitely want to do something with that, and like if you're a Unity developer, you could already try out the integration that we have now to see if you can kind of make that run a bit more like live linked or like linked to your Unity application. So that would be kind of one way to get a bit familiar with what Arkio can do. But definitely something that we need to discuss with our community going forward.
We also got a request from some mechanical engineers for a version for them.
Yeah, that's good. Like with like mechanical, like piping, or which how mechanical? Fully like bioengineered mechanical, or
Let's see if they respond. Let's.
yeah. I think so. The idea that we have, and that's maybe good to understand also what we are aiming for with Arkio is like spatial design in general. It has a lot of similarities. So it has similarities for architecture, for stage design, for game design. Like there's very similar like applications for all forms of spatial design. And when you're talking about parametric components, for example, like these objects that can be adjusted and then like moved in real time, those kind of examples we can also see with tools like Revit and Archeo. And this parametrics and these kind of building blocks that we also put in place with some of these components that we added, they really they show what Archaeo will be able to do in some months from now, because it's basically it's a parametric editor, so we can extend that and start adding ducts and pipes and structures and things. But we need to first get the basics right and make it all much more stable before we can start expanding the libraries and building more of those components.
Great. I really want to say thank you guys all for joining us. I think there's been a lot of really fantastic conversation in the chat, a lot of good questions. Does anybody have any other questions? And I appreciate your patience with us as we absolutely ran into a hiccup today. But hopefully you got something out of it, and be on the watch. We will share more. We'll continue to do these events over the coming weeks, months throughout the competition.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks all for being here, and yeah, we'll see you at the next event. And please feel free to reach out to us on our Discord, and we'll be happy to help.
Okay, we've got a comment here about if you want to get into pipe design. We've got someone here that would love to talk to you about it.
Yes, I would love to talk to you as well. Let's do it.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you. See you next time.